Okay. Buon pomeriggio. Good evening, everyone. Welcome here in Florence. Welcome in our city hall. This is one of the most important places in our city, the place where every Monday there's the city council. I'm Cosimo Guccione, the president of the city council, and I'm sorry, I'll speak English just for the start of my speech, because this morning I woke up really early in Brussels, and yesterday night I went bed really late, so my English is not so good as I want. And thank you to be here, all the Hebrew students. Welcome here in Florence. For us, it's a really great honor to have you here. And I hope that you stay here for as a pleasure for you, and it could be a good memories for you all in all your life. Detto questo, scusatemi per il mio pessimo inglese, ma in questi giorni a Bruxelles ho avuto un ritmo non così semplice da tenere. Arrivo stamani dal Parlamento europeo ed è un piacere poter continuare questi miei giorni europei con voi. Sabato avremo un altro appuntamento sul diritto che parla di diritto internazionale e quanto mai è fondamentale avere argomenti, discussioni sul tema dell'Europa e non solo al giorno d'oggi. Grazie a tutti gli attori europei, nazionali, locali che hanno portato il loro contributo in questo evento, lo fanno da anni grazie al nostro Europe Direct, grazie a quanti quotidianamente lavorano perché appuntamenti di questo tipo si possano tenere nella nostra città e non solo. Quello che ascolteremo oggi, i vostri lavori che ascolteremo, riguardano non qualcosa di distante da noi, riguardano ciò che tutti quanti leggiamo, tranne oggi per il motivo dello sciopero, sui quotidiani. Sono questioni che hanno pienamente a che fare con le nostre vite, determinano le nostre scelte di vita, le trasformazioni delle relazioni transatlantiche, i conflitti in corso e il ruolo dell'Unione Europea, il processo di allargamento, le sfide e le prospettive, tutte questioni di cui, volenti o nolenti, consapevoli o meno, le nostre vite vengono toccate, intrecciate, e quindi argomenti di cui è fondamentale quantomeno essere consapevoli. A maggior ragione se un gruppo, più gruppi di voi, 3 gruppi hanno lavorato per approfondirli. Dicevo, sono stato in questi giorni per altri motivi al Parlamento europeo. Guardate, ho parlato con alcuni parlamentari in questi giorni, diversi, e tutti quanti hanno chiaro quelle che sono le sfide dell'Unione Europea per i prossimi giorni, mesi, anni, e riguardano esattamente gli argomenti di cui alcuni mesi fa abbiamo deciso che vi occupaste voi nei vostri approfondimenti. Abbiamo davanti poche margini di manovra, o meglio, abbiamo la necessità di essere sempre più consapevoli che o più Unione Europea si fa, più Unione Europea si riesce a rappresentare, o tantomeno riusciremo a rappresentare non solo l'Unione Europea, ma anche i nostri singoli Stati. Quindi grazie davvero per la passione, l'impegno, la dedizione che avete messo nei nostri lavori. Li ascolterò molto volentieri, così come, se mi darete il permesso, mi farà piacere inviarli a tutti i consiglieri comunali della nostra città e anche ai parlamentari europei eletti nella nostra circoscrizione, in modo tale che sappiano che siano messi al corrente di quelli che sono i punti di vista e le analisi compiuti da ragazzi e ragazze della nostra generazione. Quindi, lasciando la parola a chi meglio di me condurrà i lavori oggi pomeriggio, vi ringrazio e davvero vi auguro a tutti quanti voi, alle istituzioni che rappresentate, ai luoghi dell'Unione Europea e non solo che rappresentate, il miglior futuro possibile. Grazie.
Grazie moltissimo al Presidente del Consiglio Comunale di Firenze, grazie per la sua introduzione, perfetta introduzione a questo evento conclusivo di U-Talks, grazie anche per l'ospitalità. Ormai è una consuetudine tenere questo evento in questa bella cornice, ma non è scontato, e quindi grazie per supportare anche quest'anno in questo modo il nostro progetto che quest'anno è molto particolare, perché in questa sesta edizione il progetto U-Talks si è arricchito di una dimensione internazionale, non soltanto nei temi ma nella partecipazione, perché grazie alla partecipazione dell'Università di Firenze al partenariato ValuEUs, quest'anno hanno partecipato studenti di molte università non italiane, insieme a studenti appunto della Università di Firenze. Quindi questa è un'edizione ad un altissimo tasso di internazionalità, ragione per la quale abbiamo deciso di utilizzare le due lingue, quindi un po' l'italiano per coordinare, ma poi le presentazioni verranno svolte in inglese, anche perché i lavori, le discussioni all'interno delle nostre tavole rotonde si sono proprio svolte in inglese. Ci sarà tempo per i ringraziamenti che sono tanti, quindi adesso procediamo con i saluti istituzionali e passo innanzitutto la parola a Ersilia Menesini, prorettrice alla didattica, ai servizi agli studenti e all'orientamento dell'Università di Firenze.
Maybe in English, so you can follow more easily. Okay, good afternoon to everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and welcome you, especially the international students, for this event. And I would like to thank, of course, the government of the city, the president of the city council, and also the mayor for this hospitality. And I would like to thank also the professors who organized this important event. And specifically the courses of political sciences and law courses that are taking part in these talks, EU talks. I bring and I wish you the welcome from the rector. I'm the vice rector, and it's a great honor for us to be part of this project and to host this important meeting. I think this is important because it's mainly a meeting for you as a student. It's a great opportunity to talk, to discuss, to have a debate about special topics or relevant topics that are highly relevant for community and society nowadays. So I think it's really important that you are here and you have been working for a long time on this topic. We think that the university is important in order to really shape the future and possibly to develop new direction for Europe. And we think that it's not simply a problem of education, of formal training, but it's really the possibility of discussing and confront about possible values, political issues or topics that we can effectively develop and build Europe. So probably these are the great opportunity that we may have to develop Europe and to develop a new direction for the future. So really, just few words to welcome you again and to have you here, and I hope that this afternoon will be particularly fruitful and particularly relevant for you as participants and possibly for the institutions, the municipality, but also the government at the higher level like in Europe. So welcome and enjoy this afternoon and this event.
So thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Dieter Schenkler, Director of the Historical Archives of the European Union.
Yes, good afternoon. I also stand up. You didn't expect me to be here. I'm the director of the Historical Archives. I'm not directly involved in this project. I'm replacing my colleague Pep Thorn, who's the director of the library. As you know, the European University Institute has a European Documentation Center. Valentina Spiga is here with us, so they are responsible and, let's say, coordinating the contribution from the side of the European University Institute. So I'm very happy to be here today, and I would like to thank the president of the Consiglio Comunale, Cosimo Guccione, for this hospitality to be here in this wonderful place once again for the 6th edition. So I understand that yesterday you were visiting the archives, in fact, which was a side event of your important talks. And it's probably, as I was told, unfortunately I couldn't be there yesterday, but as I was told, there was also future in the past, and this I find quite interesting. So that when you saw the projects from the 50s about the European defense community, a project that failed, obviously, and you learned about the enlargements and the ideas from the 50s and 60s, the principal values and ideas about the European Union, I understood that you were quite excited and you liked going back in time, but in fact the future was always there. So if you start about the EDC project, the famous one from 52, which failed in 54, now we're there. We have a common security and defense policy in the European Union, so we came from a very long way, from a failure within the community project in the 50s to the 90s and now in the 2000s, so we have made a long way. Also, the other topic, enlargements, you saw some files about the first ideas. Schuman thought that this union or this community is a growing one. It should grow, and it's open to grow. This is an important aspect. And in fact, we are there. So with the first, second, and third, and all the other enlargements, it grew from just 6 members, as you saw yesterday, the initial 6, to 27 today. So I think also the past shows that there has always been a future. There's always been an optimistic future. And mind you, with all the optimism after the Second World War, with which the founders of European Union in those days started the project, and let's say the most advanced thought about supranational sovereignty and also solidarity in Europe, soon after the Cold War came in, so another threat and conflict. So these are the 3 topics that I'm very curious to hear about today. We're now 80 years ahead from the initial project, and so I'm very happy to be here. Thank all the organizers and the partners, and this will be certainly a very interesting debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and now I invite Vito Borrelli from the Italian representation of the European Commission. The floor is yours.
Grazie e buon pomeriggio a tutti, è un vero piacere, un onore per me essere qui oggi e vorrei ringraziare per questo gli organizzatori per avermi invitato e estendere anche i miei saluti a tutti i partecipanti, ai relatori di questa sessione di apertura. However, considering the international flavor of this year's edition, I would like to switch to English and tell all the participants in these interesting talks that I'm delighted to join you in the wonderful and historic setting of the Sala dei Duecento of Palazzo Vecchio here in Florence, which is a place that perfectly embodies Europe's rich cultural heritage and enduring spirit of dialogue. I am really pleased to have the future of Europe because your presence today is a real testament to the importance of open debate, critical thinking, and active participation in shaping our shared European destiny. Allow me to just briefly introduce myself. I currently serve in the representation of the European Commission in Italy. I'm based in Rome, where I mainly contribute to fostering dialogue between European institutions and citizens. But prior to this role, I have been working on the Erasmus Plus program that I'm sure all of you know, which includes also an action which is called Jean Monnet, which is, by the way, involved in the support to this initiative, and has the role of promoting excellence in teaching and research on European integration. These Jean Monnet initiatives have long supported the European project by encouraging knowledge, engagement, and a deeper understanding of the Union's values and objectives. The themes that have been selected for this edition, I think, are really timely and highly relevant, and I think I do not exaggerate if I say that they closely mirror the agenda of a European Council meeting. Today, in fact, European leaders are striving to strike a right balance between preserving sound international relations with our transatlantic partners and safeguarding Europe's legitimate interests, particularly in the areas of energy supply, competitiveness, and defense. At the same time, our leaders are working to ensure the resilience and cohesion of a European Union that remains faithful to its founding values while welcoming new members. So enlargement is a really central issue in these days' discussions in the Council and in the Commission. So in this evolving landscape, the contribution of young people like you is really essential. We need your ideas, your perspectives, your vision to refresh and update our policies. This commitment is clearly reflected in the numerous initiatives that have been put forward by the European Commission to maintain a close dialogue with the younger generation and to promote something that is relatively new, this intergenerational fairness, that is one of the main objectives of the current Commission. So this is why I'm really looking forward to hearing the proposals that the working groups will present today. Your insight will not only enrich this discussion, but also help shape the Europe of tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Grazie molte. Adesso lascio la parola al mio partner in crime, Enrico Borghetto, per l'introduzione al primo gruppo di lavoro.
So thank you very much, Nicole. It's a real pleasure and also an emotion to be here with all of you. And well, let me also walk through memory lane because to some extent, this is the 6th edition. Okay, so 6 years, 6th edition of U-Talks. And I still remember the first one. It was a very different setting, very different conditions. We were in the middle of the pandemic. Nowadays, we are testing a new way to conduct these U-Talks, and I'm glad to say it works, okay? So we mixed different universities, different nationalities, and I think this is the first ingredient that made this edition special. And the second one was that we spent some time together, okay? So over the last 4 days, the international students and the Italian students, they worked together, okay? So they spent time, so they were not just an image on a screen, but they had really the possibility to engage in deep dialogue, in deep conversation. And I think these 2 ingredients, so having an international dialogue and meeting in person as human beings, is really, well, an encouraging move towards a solution to some of the challenges that you discussed. And so this takes me to really to the core of this event, which is to introduce the discussion, the presentation actually of your discussions. And we start with the first group, which is the enlargement group, challenges and perspective. So let me just outline the structure of this presentation. You have 15 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions, okay, from the audience. So feel free to raise your hand and intervene. And of course, we will have some of you presenting, okay, but also the rest of the group is also, let's say, asked to participate also in the Q&A. So for this first group, we will have the coordinator of the roundtables, which is, in this case, is Martina Colli from the University of Florence, and then we will have two students, Teodora Natanilovic and Hannes Gasser, both from the University of Florence. Martina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Enrico. I'm Martina Colli. I am a postdoctoral researcher in European Union law at the University of Florence. And I want to start today by, of course, thanking the organizers of the EU Talks initiative, all the organizers, the Florence City Council, Europe Direct, University of Florence, and the European University Institute, and also the European Documentation Centers. But I also want to thank the students for participating in this initiative and making it a really successful one. This is actually my second edition, my second participation as a coordinator of EU Talks. The first one was in the very first edition during COVID time. And EU Talks is always a great opportunity for students to debate on European affairs and on the future of the European Union, but also is an opportunity for us as coordinators to guide them, to learn from them, but also to be inspired by their ideas and their enthusiasm. And this year, I had the pleasure to coordinate with Duccio Bongiovanni the roundtable on the enlargement of the European Union, its challenges and its prospects. And I want to take just a few minutes to explain to all of you how we decided to organize this roundtable before then leaving the floor to the students for their proposals and recommendations. So after a first meeting collecting feedbacks from the students on their expectations and their interest, Duccio and I organized 4 online meetings plus a final in-person meeting which took place last Monday when the international student joined us here in person in Florence. And through these 4 meetings, first at the beginning we try to guide the students through the difficulties of the enlargement procedure, so the procedure to accede the European Union, his historical evolution, and also how it differs from the text of the legal text and the practice. And generally, the fil rouge of all, actually, our roundtable was discussing and debating on how enlargement lies at the intersection between law and politics. And in the following meetings, the students had the opportunity to debate on various issues concerning, indeed, enlargement, particularly 4 key and topical issues where the accession criteria, and in particular the role of values as accession condition to the European Union, and the scrutiny of these values by the European Union. A second topic was actually the institutional reforms that the European Union itself needs to undertake ahead on the next enlargement. A third topic was the prospect and the pros and cons of a gradual integration of candidate countries in European Union, so the possibility for candidate countries to get gradual accession to the benefits of European integration. And a fourth and very topical issue was how to manage enlargement in the current geopolitical scenario, and to what extent we need a stronger foreign policy by the European Union in this respect. We also had the pleasure to have a guest in our third meeting, Professor Iris Godner-Lang from Zagreb University, who is not only a legal scholar expert on enlargement, but also who participated directly in the negotiation for the accession of Croatia to the European Union. And she could share her experience, her practical experience with the students, and debate with them on the challenges of enlargement through real-life cases. So that's all for the presentation, for the organization of our roundtable. I'll now leave the floor to Hannes and Theodora, two students from our group, for explaining to you their proposals.
Okay. First of all, I would like also to thank you. It is a real honor to be here. I want to thank everyone who was involved in organize these days, especially since we met in presence since Monday. The program was really extraordinary. Also nice to meet the fellow students to talk here, and also being here at this amazing location. And so I will start. Basically, yesterday we have been at the Historical Archive of the European Union. I also want to thank once again for your hospitality there. And yesterday, our focus was about like the public opinion before the Big Bang enlargement in 2004. And what we found out that basically the questions from 2001, 2002 are the same we have now. Basically, who will join and when is the moment? As we see on the slides, in 2001 and 2002, it was not thought that the Big Bang enlargement with 10 member states will happen. But as we know, this was the largest enlargement in history till today. However, right now the European Union is in a state of enlargement fatigue. In fact, Croatia was the last member state who joined in 2013. And actually, since then, the European Union became even smaller, as the UK decided to leave the Union and Brexit was finally done in 2020. And as we all know, the geopolitical reality has changed in the last few years, especially with the Russian war in Ukraine. But I also would like to mention the increasing threats from the US under the Donald Trump government have put Europe under pressure. And for this, it's just logical that the enlargement is seen now as a geostrategic investment for the European long-term security. A shifting point was when Ukraine was applying for the candidate status. And in 2022, Ukraine, Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina received the status. In 2023, Georgia received the candidate status. This means right now there are 9 countries who have a candidate status. And I would also like to mention there's the possibility to have a 10th country, as Iceland will have a referendum this August about the restarting of the negotiation process, as they have already negotiated, but in 2015 they decided to suspend those. So we are living in a period where we could have another Big Bang enlargement quite soon. However, one thing we discussed during our group meetings was especially about the case of Ukraine, and we were talking about like the possibility of having a fast-track accession. However, we have to remember that the accession process and to be a member state cannot be granted easily. The procedure has to be based on strict, fair, and merit-based criteria. The Copenhagen criteria need to be at the center of an accession, and we cannot dilute our values. Otherwise, the European Union could not exist in the way it is now, and we have to ensure that. However, this brings me to our second point, as we are talking about the values. However, in reality, we have problems within the European Union. Democratic backsliding in the European is a fundamental issue. We all know in Hungary and in Poland, we have dealt with this in the past years extensively. Violation of the rule of law, a lack of press freedom. I mean, with the recent results in Hungary, there might be an opportunity to have a progress in this situation, but it's also a matter of time to see that. And what I would like to say, if in the member states they do not care about the fundamental values, it is difficult that they should adhere to these values. So we have to first be sure that within the European Union we fix it, and it's also because like the EU has a lack of strength in these matters, as we do not have the tools to act accordingly. And with this, I would like to say what we were coming up. We wanted to think we have to enlarge in one way, but also at the same time, the enlargement process is a long-lasting process. For example, Montenegro is negotiating since 2012, and now we have 2026. It is a long process. So we were thinking also to have a kind of a gradual integration so that countries who make progress are rewarded in a sense. Especially we were thinking about like to give them accession to financial instruments, and also maybe in the long term we're thinking about the internal market. However, even those gradual steps, they have to be based on benchmarks, because we have to defend the rule of law and also, for example, anti-corruption matters, as this is the core within our union, and we cannot give that slightly away. So I will give now the floor to my colleague, Theodora.
Thank you, Hannes, for all the points raised so far. Before I begin, I would like to thank all the actors behind this project, because having this wonderful idea is one thing, but executing it is a task and a half. And if it weren't for all the effort that you have made, we would not be here. But most of all, I would like to thank all the people present in this room, because if it weren't for the international character of this project, we would not be having such an excellent and multidimensional aspect that we have here. Now I will go on with the suggestions that we have come up with. And the first one that I will go over is the idea of obtaining observer status for candidate states, which would entail that candidate countries can access institutions such as the European Parliament and the European Commission, but without obtaining veto and voting rights. However, it is important to note that this is only a stop along the way for these countries and not an end destination, because otherwise we may risk facing a term that we have coined throughout our debates that we like to call the Norway effect. This entails that a candidate country is satisfied solely with being part of the European Economic Area and not being fully integrated into the European Union. It is also important to note that this is not just a distant fear that we have. On the contrary, this is something that is happening on the ground today, and here on the slide you can see Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama, and the Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who have just recently come up with another idea for Albania and Serbia to be gradually integrated solely into the European internal market and the Schengen area without accessing institutions such as the European Commission and the European Parliament. Of course, this was rejected by the European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos. Next up, it is important to note that European enlargement, of course, fundamentally changes candidate countries all throughout their path to EU accession. However, they're not the only actors that are being changed throughout this process. It is also the European Union on its own that is being changed, and it will continue to be fundamentally changed throughout this process. And this is why we call for an internal transformation of the European Union prior to allowing further enlargement of the European Union. A key point of contention that we see in light of this issue is the unanimity vote in the European Council, because it is a primary obstacle to effective decision-making. Now, of course, EU enlargement is one policy area that suffers from this, and this is not an issue that is new to us. On the contrary, we can go back all the way to the 1960s when France was blocking the accession of the United Kingdom, but we can also see it today in situations such as Greece and Bulgaria are blocking the accession of Northern Macedonia, Croatia doing the same to Serbia, as well as Hungary in the case of Ukraine. Furthermore, there are other policy areas that suffer from this, such as the common foreign and security policy, where the European Union continuously fails to come together at decisive yet so divisive topics, such as the conflict in Palestine or sanctions to Russia. However, this also hinders the internal issues that the European Union is faced with, and a key point of contestation here is the upholding of EU values. It is important to note that the Article 7 of the Treaty of the European Union was created with the idea that member states should be punished should they fail to uphold the core values of the European Union. Nonetheless, we can see examples such as Hungary and Poland, which prove that while in theory this article is very important, but in practice it continuously fails to be executed. And for this reason, we call for a move from the unanimity vote to qualified majority voting in certain areas of the common foreign and security policy. However, we recognize that this is a very politically sensitive topic, and for this reason, we call for member states to utilize the opportunity of a constructive abstention where they can protect their national interest while allowing the EU not to come to yet another deadlock, which we are seeing again and again in the European Council. Furthermore, we have noted the need for the European Union to come to a shift when it comes to the communication within candidate countries. We have two regions that are now at the heart of the enlargement process, and those are the Western Balkans and the Eastern neighborhood. Speaking of the Western Balkans, we know that Euroscepticism hinders the European enlargement project again and again, whereas the Eastern neighborhood is faced with a growing polarization in regards to whether they should go in the direction of the West or the East. For this reason, we believe that the European Union must shift the public opinion, which continues to be negative in light of the European Union, because pro-EU politicians, such as the ones in Montenegro and Albania that are closing chapter after chapter, did not come together overnight. They are the result of pro-EU societies that elected them. Contrastingly, we have the examples of Serbia and Georgia, where governments either cannot or simply refuse to effectively communicate not only the proactive role that the European Union upheld in these societies up to this point, but also the benefits that these countries will experience throughout EU integration. And for this reason, we believe that the European Union must be more proactive in this light. To conclude, it is important to note that the EU enlargement policy is not just a game of numbers. It is not about the question of by 2030, will the European Union have 28 or 35 or God knows how many members? No. EU enlargement is a litmus test for the European Union to prove whether it is a truly legitimate and united and decisive actor on the global stage. It is a united European Union that is strongest geopolitical asset, and enlargement is key to achieving it. Thank you so much.
So, thank you, Martina, Hannes, and Theodora. And now we open to the floor to the questions, okay? So, actually, we were discussing here a question that we might ask also to the rest of the groups. I mean, was it easy for you to also reach these sort of conclusions, or there was disagreement on which points? It would be very interesting also to bring these forward, because I think it's extremely interesting also to understand the debate. What was it about? What were the sticking points? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for the question. Of course, after me, if there is anyone else that would also like to contribute, I warmly encourage you to do so. I think that, as I said, the international character of the conversations that we are having, of course, entails that we will be having quite contrasting opinions, because we have Italian students who have been enjoying the benefits of the European Union for quite some time now. We have students from Croatia who are the last members of the European Union. On the other hand, you also have people from the Eastern Partnership as well as from the Western Balkans who have been in this path for quite some time. So on the one hand, there is a strong belief in the European Union and the need for further enlargement, but on the other, there's also a sense of losing legitimacy of the European Union, especially when it comes to its values, because again and again, we are seeing a shift towards illiberalism all throughout Europe, be it within the European Union or outside of it, and that begs the question whether the EU can call for these values if it cannot uphold them. So there was one of the key points of contestations that we have all throughout these debates. And it is also about all of these recommendations that we had. It was never a unanimous vote, at least not from the outset, because again, we are having very different identities and backgrounds coming into these conversations. And we understand that it is very hard to change the European Union, which is highly bureaucratic. So even the idea that we have about qualified majority voting, it is very, very optimistic and very ambitious, to say the very least. But we understand that upholding the status quo will not lead us anywhere, because it has been over a decade and we have yet to see a decisive shift. So I think that none of the points that we have made were always unanimous from the outset. But if anything, I think that these conversations are so crucial to understanding that these are not unanimous or one-dimensional points of discussion. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nina Sajc. I come from the University of Banja Luka, and really thank you all for this wonderful, wonderful presentation you had. Thank you to our organizers, and I think that this was the highlight of our 2.5-year project that we are doing with the Jean Monnet Network. I think that we in the network, the professors, have become one small family, but we are also happy to see that our students are also creating small families of their own. This was an excellent presentation, and I would like to congratulate all of you on doing so. You have touched upon many aspects and many ideas that already exist when it comes to the enlargement issue. So you've talked about the restructuring of the European Union, you talked about different ways, the gradual integration and the risks of having the gradual integration, such as Norwegian effect. One thing that maybe was missing, although you did mention it at the beginning, it was your colleague, I forgot your name.
Hannes.
Hunt. He did mention it at the beginning, was that at the end of the day, and this is at least what we are hearing from the Brussels, the enlargement is, after all, geopolitical investment. And this was something that we, coming from the Western Balkans, have heard, have seen, have felt. And these were the exact words after the Ukraine and Moldova were given a candidacy status before Bosnia and Herzegovina was granted, for example. So maybe this was missing from the debate, but you did touch upon it, which was very good, and you did give us some very, very good proposals that are already on the table, and you have managed to elaborate them and give pros and cons. So really, bravo again, chapeau for all of you. So my question would be maybe more towards towards the students that are not experience the full membership of the European Union. I know that you are Theodora, right? Yeah. So maybe you can give a chance to somebody else to speak. I think we have Ukrainian students as well, right? And from Bosnia and Herzegovina and someone else. So from your opinion, what benefits, you know, now that you are a student, you can travel anywhere you want without visa. This especially concerns students of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I'm putting them on the floor now, and I know they're not gonna like it. What benefits, apart from the fact that, you know, you can travel freely now, you can be part of the Erasmus, you can join the European Club of Students if you like, what other benefits would you see from being a member of the European Union? And so if we can have answers from one or two students from non-EU countries. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sophia. I will stand up. First of all, I was here, and I think it's a very appropriate moment to say gratitude to all of you, to all European members, and to Italy in particular for your support to Ukraine. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to participate in this program. And also I wanted to reflect slightly on the enlargement position. It was very interesting and your speech was incredible. I'm just a big fan. I just wanted to add a little bit on the enlargement procedure, which seems to be a little bit simplified. Because of course, if looking overall on the procedure of Ukraine, for instance, because I'm from Ukraine, Hungary and Poland might seem like countries that can create certain obstacles for Ukrainian EU integration. However, as we have seen already from the procedure of sanctions, it's far more complicated than just certain states having more pro or not that pro-Ukrainian positions. For instance, if we are talking about sanctions towards Russian Federation, every single country has its own economy, its own trade, and it is very complicated at one point of time simply to deny using Russian gas, of course, Russian products, etc., etc. And for instance, the latest, biggest package of sanctions related to luxurious production, which was supposed to hit very much on the Russian economy. And you know who was the biggest obstacle there? Belgium, not Hungary, not Poland. Why? Because Belgium is a huge exporter of luxurious goods, both in the EU and outside the EU. So if we are looking case by case, enlargement process is a bunch of case-by-case scenarios that has to be reviewed in detail. So it's very simplifying to narrow the discussion towards Poland or Hungary, because of course there are many people both in Hungary and Poland who wants Ukraine to join, but there are certain political, trade moments that stand as an obstacle here. And moving back to the question about Ukraine, there's like two parts of it. I would say a moral aspect of a question, because we as Ukrainians feel European, and it's important for us to state that we are the part of the European community, but also practical ones. Ukraine inherited very Soviet-like institutions, and by cooperating constantly with Russian Federation, Belarus, Moldova, China, Turkey sometimes, it was very hard for us to shift to the European value chains, but also European style of administration of our institutions. And that is why it is very important for us, and this is a decisive moment, to move, practically speaking, doing business, cooperating, and simply acting in a European way. Because we feel Europeans, the society of Ukraine is very European, but our institutions so far are not. And this is the biggest obstacle that we are facing, and that is why we are trying to reform ourselves rapidly. Me as a student, of course, I enjoy visa-free status. I don't need visa to come and travel to the EU, despite the fact that I have to travel 2 days in the train in a row, because we don't fly from Ukraine. But I would say that Ukrainian students are far from being naive and just enjoying the visa-free status to see Capri or something like that. We face this opportunity something bigger. We want to speak up in the European institutions. We want to speak up that Ukraine is not a rural country, but the country that can offer cultural, industrial, touristic opportunities to the European Union, that we can offer cheaper value chains that can make market advantages, especially when we are talking about competition with the United States and China. We have many wonderful resources that we can sell to the EU. So if we are talking about a broader position, not just us as students enjoying Erasmus+, but this is perfect, thank you for that. Ukraine has a lot to offer, and we are want to cooperate with you with an open hand, waiting for Europe, and Ukraine is also waiting, and the European Union to cooperate and make Ukraine European together. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question, Vito Borrelli.
Thank you very much for a very, very interesting presentation. I would like to congratulate you on the well-structured, clear, and very well-elaborated presentation. You raised very relevant issues like the gradual integration of new members and topics like also the long-term vision of a stronger security for the whole continent if we annex more countries. But then you raised a very sensitive issue, which is unanimity. And my question is, to what extent do you think that a new enlargement phase might be effective before making a real governance reform of the Union in order to avoid that a higher number of countries may, in a way, hindrance the effectiveness of the internal governance of the Union? Thank you.
Hi, hello, my name is Martina. I'm from University of Zagreb, and thank you very much. So this morning on our last meeting, we were discussing some questions that may risen, and this was the first one. So yeah, we are aware that unanimity is the biggest question. So we all know that European Union has to be changed to some other extent to be able to navigate those problems, even in regards not only the enlargement process, but everything else like the agricultural policies and all of that. But the question is, do we have time and do we have the resources to be more integrated or to be enlarged? That's the real question, which we haven't tackled in the end, because it's just like Teodora said, we come from the very different backgrounds. I'm from Croatia, which is the last country which joined the European Union. And in 2013, it was a much different time than in the early 2000s when many middle and East, let's call them Eastern European countries joined the EU. So even for us, the path was very, very different. And today, 10 plus years into European Union, it's much more different for us than for France, Italy, Spain, and all those countries. So the question that was written from the professor in Banja Luka was right, not only for the Western Balkan countries who are not the countries that are in European Union, but also for the newer members who face the obstacles on daily basis. So yeah, I'm very thankful for being here, for being able to discuss some of these questions with my group, and especially thanks to Martina and Duccio for the guidance and for everything they taught us here. And also the archives were very interesting because you have some newspapers from 2000 to 2005 when they were debating we have to have Poland in European Union, and then if we have Poland, we have to have Slovakia and Czech Republic. Nowadays, when we are looking to Western Balkan countries, we cannot join them all together because every country there is different. It has different questions, it has different problems. Many of them are in interior. So yeah, the thing and the narrative has changed, but like Hannes started this whole presentation, it's always the question, who and when. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And before going ahead with the next group, allow me to stress a couple of aspects of your presentation, which I really liked. So first of all, I like the fact that in discussing the topic of enlargement, you took into account the perspective of both the EU, the member states, and the states that may accede in the future, the EU. So you had not a sort of EU-centric vision. Very often we think that the question is it convenient for the European Union to enlarge, to include other states, and convenient under different perspectives, politically convenient, geopolitically convenient, convenient from an economic point of view, so on and so forth. You did not consider only this perspective, but you only consider the perspective of the states that once could be a member of the Union. And the question which you raised is the EU accession to the EU an attractive perspective for new states? Because we know that this is probably not the very best phase of the process of European integration. The EU, as you said, has important problem that the EU has to solve. And it's important to solve also in the perspective of assisting the process of enlargement, because I think that we all agree that enlargement is important, not without conditions. Very important condition. We have to defend our values, because what we propose to new states, it's a model based on rules, but it's a model based on values. But this model shall be defended, shall be reinforced also internally in the EU. So when we discuss the topic of enlargement, we also have, we meaning the states which are already the members of the European Union, need also to question themselves and say, the union that we are offering is a good perspective, is an attractive perspective. And the second comment concerns a point which may be a minor point, but in my view it's not. You raise the issue of the quality of the communication on what the EU is and the policies of the European Union. And I think that this is a very crucial point. We tremendously need to communicate the EU and its policies in the proper way, clearly in respect of acceding states or states that may be interested in acceding in the EU, but also in respect of the member states, and most importantly, in respect of the citizens of the Union. And this is clearly also one of the purposes of our initiative, trying to communicate in the EU, not trying to convene that this is the best EU that we had and that we can have. As you can see, we are also highlighting many limits of today's phase of the process of European integration, but this is very important to make people understanding what the EU is, with its pros, its cons, and what the EU should be and could be tomorrow. So thank you very much. And now we move to the second group, the group which discussed the topic of the ongoing conflicts and the role of the EU. And let me say about the choice of the topics that when almost, I think, 1 year ago, we selected these 3 topics, we were clearly aware that we were selecting odd topics. This is the reason why we chose them, but clearly we could not predict that they would have been really on fire today. So please, the floor is yours, and notably I ask Jacob Piep, one of the coordinators, together with Andrea Pollonio, to take the floor and explain what you did. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Jacob Piep. I'm a PhD researcher at the European University Institute. And together with Andrea, we had the honor of leading or providing some guidance to the group of ongoing conflicts. And before I give the floor to the students, I will give some procedural remarks, and I will highlight one of my highlights that I had during my time as a coordinator. Firstly, I mean, we already said it, the term ongoing conflicts I mean, what does it really mean? It can be ongoing conflicts about many things. We already spoke a bit about ongoing conflicts about EU values, but we decided, and this was the beginning of our discussion, we decided that we focus on ongoing geopolitical conflicts. And this is, I mean, as it was said, a hot topic. And even during our time, we got even more conflicts. And the second choice we made is that we not only looked at the past, so we not only looked at the shortcomings of the EU that the EU had in the past, but we also tried to look at the future. So we asked ourselves the normative question on how can the EU do a better job in the future? How can the EU respond more effectively to future conflicts the EU is facing? And just let me conclude with one of the highlights I had, because sometimes we read all of these texts and these conflicts might seem a bit far away to us when we read these texts within Europe. So within the UI, we have many visiting professors, visiting students, and I knew that there was a professor who was called Professor Stetsik, and he was a professor in Ukraine, and at the moment he's a visiting fellow in Vienna, also visiting at the UI. And I asked him over coffee if he would be willing to speak to our students, to give a bit of a more close perspective on what is happening in Ukraine, what the EU is doing within this conflict, and what the EU can do better. And he was really happy to take the time to the students, and he gave the speech to the students and really provided us a close perspective. And it's really useful to have this perspective, and it makes the conflict more concrete, which sometimes might feel far away or moving to the background in the context that we have so many different conflicts at the same time. So now, without further ado, I will give the floor to the students to provide us a bit of a closer picture of this topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susana Rengifo. I am from Barranquilla, Colombia, and I would really like to give thanks to all the ones that made this event possible, the organization, and all the international students that are here. It's been an honor to meet all of you and to be in this such important space. And also, I would really like to thank the fact that I am from another continent, and my voice, it's been heard in this moment. And that's really important to me, and I know to all of my people back in my country. So, as a starting, we are the ongoing conflict and the role of the EU. We have to take into account that now we are living such an important and extraordinary moment in history in which ever since the World War II finished, there has been such an uprising of conflicts all around the world. And Europe is no more, it's not a merely observant of this, but rather it's in the middle of all this chaos, let's say. And when we went to the archives, we had the opportunity and the honor of seeing de Gasperi speech in 1946 through the Paris Peace Conference, in which he stated that it would never be possible to create a union, not a system, but rather a union between countries, if there was not values that uphold this union together. And in fact, it's incredible that 80 plus years later, this analysis that he made back then, it can still apply to the present. And that is actually because the European Union, the system, was not made just for economically reasons, but rather as a value project, as a normative type of project. However, right now, in this present moment, we can see that the values that were proclaimed and the actions that have been done, have been happening, do not connect. There is not a coherent strategic response towards, for example, the lack of security and the threat of the security of the European Union. And during our conversations, we talked about two main conflicts that showed this division, which were the Russia full-scale invasion to Ukraine in 2022 and the Palestine-Gaza in 2023. And why is this? Because with Russia, with this full-scale invasion, we saw that in the speech, at first, there was a unity. But quickly, with the actions, this unity crumbled. And right now, even with the sanctions, and even if in the speech, in the theory, there is a unity, in the actions, there's nothing. And on the other side, with Palestine and Gaza, from the start, it showed that these divisions ran even deeper than what we thought. So, we realized that the answer of the behavior of the European Union itself on this type of specific processes, which are the conflicts, is not something just related to political will and differences, but rather to the structure, the architecture in which the system is made. For example, this making processes and also the lack of autonomy that the European Union system has to some specific topics, it's what it's making it behave the way that it behaves. And we realized why is the reason of this dependence and the reason of this voting procedure, sorry. And through some analysis that we made, and now I would give the word to my partner, Ben, to explain this.
So, hello everyone, my name is Finn, I'm from Berlin in Germany, and right now I'm studying at Université Paris-8 Saint-Denis. And yes, I also want to express my gratitude for the opportunity to speak here. I feel like, yes, I'm in a very privileged position that so many people want to hear my input. And yeah. As Susanna already outlined in our research and our discussions, we talked a lot about the structural limitations that the EU can pose when we talk about its role in international conflicts, and that, of course, because of this very complicated decision process involving the requirement of unanimous voting, the EU is nowadays often seen as a very slow international player, which takes a lot of time to respond to current events, and is in a time where things seem to happen every other day. And furthermore, there's also issues of a big fragmentation between intergovernmental and supranational power, and of course the issue of sovereign interests, as we may have seen, for example, Hungary, where only a few weeks ago, to protect its national interests, Hungary blocked a support package for Ukraine. And as we already discussed in the presentation before us, these issues of anonymous voting, of course, are very complex to solve. And according to us, we think it's very important, of course, to address these issues, but also to look at strategies that can help us give a more immediate response to ongoing conflicts. And this is why we decided in our main part to focus ourselves on two key dependencies of the European Union that limits its influence on the international scale. So on the one side, we have the energy, the reliance on foreign energy, and the dependency on defense. Yes. So I'll start off with the issue of energy dependency. In the year 2024 and 25, the European Union imported about 58 to 60% of its energy from external actors. And yeah, right now the USA and Norway are our most important partners in that regard. Of course, that was not always the case. And only a few years ago, there was a big shock and a big shift in supply chains after the Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine. And so in our research, we looked a lot on the program REPowerEU, which aimed to reduce the dependency on Russian gas and in general Russian energy, and achieve that goal through diversification of partners and also a focus on green transition inside of member states. And as we can see in the graph in our PowerPoint presentation, this really had an effect on the supply chains of the European Union, which now, of course, has a lot of different suppliers. Yes, we could talk at length about this data, but of course, we only have so much time. But what we really want to stress in this part is that of course, this program of Repower EU can be seen as a success, but that doesn't mean that the core issues are really solved. And according to us, we have to be careful that, yes, these forms of dependencies may have shifted in the last few years, but they still very much exist. And as we can see in the last few weeks, the European Union is very vulnerable to supply shocks due to external conflicts. And so as former German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also outlined in a speech in 2022, according to us, the real solution to this issue of reliance on foreign imports is somewhere between a form of strategic independency and domestic production of energy, and a diversification of partnerships with allies who share the values of the European Union. And yeah, finally, I'll talk a bit about the military dependency of the European Union. In general, there exists a sort of capability expectations gap, that the European Union wants to present itself as an independent player on the international scene and kind of project strategical autonomy, but clearly lacks the hard power to do so. And of course, right now, the key issue we are faced with is the heavy reliance on NATO, which has proven to not always be a very reliable organization. And as we saw in the historical archive of the European Union, this is not the first time that we've had these kind of discussions. And of course, the EDC, which we already talked about, was one of the first projects in the 50s, which really posed the question of how could a supranational European defense force look like. And of course, these negotiations in the 50s ultimately didn't succeed it was mainly national interests, in this case it was France, which derailed the projects of the EDC. And furthermore, the archives were very, very interesting because a lot of documents from the time also showed us how many different questions this issue poses. Of course, supranational defense force also needs a kind of democratic legitimacy, and this is why it also entails maybe a more general reform of the EU and its institutions. And because this is such a large topic and such a complicated topic, for us it was important to also look at more immediate steps that the European Union can take, because for us it's also important to stress that there already exist certain structures which allow cooperation between member states. For example, we have the OCCAR, so the Organization for Joint Armament Cooperation, the European Defense Agency, and the European Defense Fund. And we really wanted to stress that these kinds of structures could help us to consolidate power in a more immediate way.
And just for summarizing, like the proposals that we discussed during our conversations, first we have that there should be a transition from unanimity to qualified majority votation, an increasing strategic autonomy so that the EU can be more autonomous by itself. However, and also diversifying European Union's partners. To not fall into the one partner trap, one partner dependence. And it's because the distance between Europe's values and Europe's actions is not a matter of a failure in principles, but rather an architectural problem. And architecture can be modified. Thank you.
So thank you very much. We are impressed also by your work. I know that there is already a question under preparation, but just a second. I would like to pose you first the same question that was posed before. So how did you manage to reach consensus, if you reached consensus on all the points you raised? Were there any divergent opinion that remained on the table or not? And then I have another question, because you have in common with the previous group the point on the need to overcome unanimity. So this point is for you, this question, let's say, is for you and for you. It's a sort of exercise in imagination. So let's imagine you're not here, you are in the middle of the intergovernmental conference in which the representatives of the governments of the member states are discussing whether to reform the treaties, because we know that in order to overcome unanimity, we need to revise the treaties, and unfortunately, we need unanimity. Which is the argument, and you have only one, which is the argument you would use in order to convince the states, all the states, that we need to overcome unanimity, at least in some respects? You can maybe pose another question.
Thank you very much for taking the word. And before addressing the question, I would like to compliment the group on their work. So congratulations. And you have approached the concept topic, such as the role of the conflicts and the clarity and the critical inside. So the question is the sequences. So in the light of the contemporary conflicts, particularly the war between Russia and Ukraine and the recurring crisis in the Middle East, to what extent can the European Union be considered a normative power capable of effectively shaping international dynamics? Or it is role structurally constrained by the intergovernmental nature on its common foreign and security policy, internal strategic divergences among member states, and its enduring military dependence on NATO? Thank you.
You have very impressive question.
But you are impressive students.
Indeed. I will take floor. I will just share. It's. I guess your question is very opinionated, so there is no wrong or correct answers. What we discussed in our group was that from the last years, from the outbreak of the full-scale invasion in Ukraine and then the conflict in Gaza, we can see that the proximity to the threat becomes a determinant towards direct actions that the member states do. So the dynamics that we can observe is that on the European level, institutional, like more big, there's not many defense actions made, actually. Of course, there are packages of support to Ukraine, humanitarian aid, and other packages of more universal supports to the states, but if we are talking about the direct action that would imply certain intervention of the EU or more direct actions, we cannot observe them that much. Meanwhile, if we are looking in countries that are adjacent to the Russian Federation, to Estonia, to Finland, if we're looking at Poland, if we're looking to Romania, they have already, as the European states, experienced the thing of the Russian drones threats. Meaning that for the first time since the Second World War, the European states actually felt the threat. So I guess that, to be honest, I didn't fully understand the question, but if I understand it overall, I guess that the proximity to the border, especially if we're talking about the Russian border, directly determines the expansion of GDP towards defense, the interest towards moving to a more defense advanced economies, of course. We can observe what Finland does in recent months. It's incredible. And unfortunately, from what I can observe personally and what we can observe to Ukraine, as long as threat remains distant, it doesn't seem real. And that is why countries that are adjacent to Russian Federation, they do real actions. And this is the determinant. The question is to what extent EU as an institution and institutions per se are ready to start to make preventive actions and not to start acting when the drone actually reaches the member state.
Any other question? Okay, yep.
I will be referring to the trap of unanimity. How are we going to get out of it if we need unanimity to get out of it? And I think this is the central part of the whole debate. And myself, I think that it's a matter of pragmatism and cooperation. At this point, it's easy to see Europe's lack of action in certain topics, and it's just a point of up to which point is Europe, the European Union, going to allow the system to be an obstacle to having more concrete actions. So yes, the unanimity, it's, as I said, it's a trap. Like, it's really tricky to get out of it. But the point in here, it's just a reform. And on the other hand, you have cooperation, which can lead to the bridge of pragmatism that will be the qualified majority voting. And responding to the first question, that is, if we reach unanimity on these proposals, let's say that the ones that during the virtual conversations, we started talking about the conflicts and how is European Union behaving and what should we do and so on, so on, so on, that when actually, or organizers abroad this, okay, so what are you going to propose? This is like the three main things or two main things that we can say that arise. The unanimity needs to be, we need to reach the qualified majority voting, and there needs to be a reform referring to the dependency or lack of autonomy that Europe has towards certain topics and certain actors in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these very interesting also answers. As we move forward, let me just make a short comment also. First of all, on qualified majority voting, to some extent, we can even think that at the elite level, we made some steps forward with after the recent elections in Hungary, because to some extent the Orban veto was way on the decision-making process, and I would say most of the elites were kind of hiding also behind this veto. Okay, so that's the reason why we cannot do a lot of things, and now we got our hands finally free to do more. We'll see. Okay, so this is the first point. So a lot of there are a lot of expectations after what happened this weekend in Budapest. But I want to add also another complexity, which is the public opinion, especially public opinion in small countries. And are we ready really to tell them actually? To some extent, if you move to qualified majority voting, your vote won't count as much as the vote of other countries, bigger countries. Are they ready also to make this step? And of course, this brings up new questions, but new questions that we need to answer in the coming years. And these are questions actually that must be faced in the short term, not in the long term. And having said this, we move to the last presentation. This time we talk about transatlantic relations. And the debate will be introduced by our coordinator, one of the two coordinators, which is Frederick Brouwer from the European University Institute. And then we will have three students, Artemisia Fili and Mattia Turello from the University of Florence, and Hanna Spack from the University of Kharkiv. Frederick, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. Thanks to you and all of your colleagues for organizing the EU talks. We had a lot of fun, and it was a lot of interesting discussions that came up with many students, so thanks for organizing that. As introduced, my name is Frederick Brouwer. I'm from the EUI, where I do research in EU law, and together with Claudio Cozzi Fucile, we have the pleasure of convening a group of wonderful students to talk about the future of transatlantic relations. And let me just explain a little bit about how we approach the topic and what we did as a group. And maybe first on the group, we were a very diverse group. There were 12 students from all over Europe, with people from Netherlands, Germany, France, Ukraine, Bosnia, Italy, lots of different views and lots of different perspectives. And it was really engaging and valuable to hear from all of the students how they approach this topic. And it's not an easy topic. The name in itself, the future of transatlantic relations, already shows that it's a very challenging and very broad topic. So the challenge for our group really was, how do we approach this topic and get to something that's not general and abstract, but that's something in-depth and specific and concrete that we can offer you today. And we did that by making two decisions. First, we decided to go into a bit more detail of two angles of the topic, because transatlantic relationships brings in a lot. It brings economy, it brings in security, it brings in energy, lots of different issues that are ongoing today. And as the previous group already showed, lots of these topics also involves conflicts, very fast changing relationships, so lots of stuff that's happening. So we decided to focus on two aspects of the topic in our first two meetings, being economy and security. A second decision that we made is that we invited an external professor, Professor Carlotta Mingardi from the University of Bologna, to talk with the students about the topic in a bit more of an historic perspective. Because, as the previous group also showed, lots of changes are going on right now in relation to transatlantic relations, the current US administration being a very obvious one, which brings in many changes that were happening while we had these talks. So we thought it would be useful for the group to take a step back and take a bit of a bird's eye view. And with Professor Mingardi, we did that. We discussed a little bit of the history of these relationships. And that resulted in some hopefully concrete and interesting recommendations, which will be presented to you by the group. Most of them, every one of them, except for me, is sitting over there. So I'll give the floor to you now, guys. Good luck.
Thank you, Frederick. It's an immense pleasure to be here, and I want to thank everyone who's here. My name is Artemisia. I'm from the University of Florence. I'm going to introduce our research, and then my colleagues are going to further explore it. After World War II, the relation between the United States and Western Europe emerged as a shared project, a political, economic, and cultural one, based on several key symbols, like the Marshall Plan, which reconstructed Europe after the war, the NATO, which guaranteed the security the collective security, and in general, the Cold War, which created a common enemy, the Soviet Union. The two sides of the Atlantic came to perceive themselves as part of the same community, namely as the West, a political and value-based community grounded in liberal democracy, trade market, and rule of law. However, with the end of the Cold War, the common enemy disappeared. This means that the structure of the international system changed profoundly. To quote Fukuyama, the end of history seems to be affirmed. The transatlantic relations begin to transform. The first signs are already visible with the interventions in the Balkans, with the so-called humanitarian war, the fracture over the war in Iraq, the so-called war against terrorism. This transformation reached a critical point with Trump's election in 2016, and perhaps even more with his second term. Today, there is a frequent talk about crisis in transatlantic relations, referring to a classical idea in the international relations theory, the fall and rise of the great powers. It seems that it is possible to affirm that the United States decline. Trump's political project, summarized in the slogan, "Make America Great Again," and the MAGA movement, reflects precisely the intention to maintain the United States' status as the world's leading power. However, putting America first means pursuing policies that inevitably clash with the interests of other international actors, in the first place, the European ones. Within this framework, several concrete policy choices emerge. The Trump administration adopted a highly aggressive trade policy. From an economic perspective, the central issue is that the U.S. trade deficit exceeds $900 billion. If we add to this cost related to international security, including European defense, the overall burden rises to more than $1.8 trillion. At the same time, Trump increased pressure on NATO allies to raise their defense spending, emphasizing how for decades this cost has largely been covered by the US. Not surprisingly, even before Trump, US administrations had been urging European allies to contribute more. Today, however, the United States appears to quote Trump, less willing to cover the other security defense. Transatlantic crisis did not begin with Trump, but under Trump, they have become more visible. They reflect a deeper shift in global power balance. It is precisely in this context that Europe can no longer limit itself to being a protected actor. It must become a strategic one, capable of taking responsibility and acting autonomously on the international stage. I now leave my floor to my colleagues. Thank you.
So thank you for giving me the word. And before we start talking about that the Europe should become a strategic actor, I think we should talk about the two problems that we still have unresolved. And the first one is the double standards that we still have in the EU, and the second one is dependence. And I would say that we should start from the double standards. Okay, it's working. So, the EU positions itself on the global market as quiet global leader on climate. What do I mean by that? Is the green transition, sustainability, environmental standards. This is central to Europe's international identity. But when we talk about what's going on for real, the contradictions are getting harder to defend. For example, we can talk about Germany that is shut down its nuclear plants, first citing that concerns after Fukushima and now framing it as climate change and at the same time, it is still extracting coal, which is not really good for ecology. Meanwhile, France, Poland, and Romania, they move toward the energetic independence, focusing on nuclear energy and treating it as a part to their independence. And then we should look at the trade, because the EU says that okay, our partners, they should meet our standards. But now has been negotiating with Mercosur and India, and a lot of people, critics, they argue that these deals, they're quite good to sign because these partners, they don't meet their standards. And there's even a deeper paradox. If Europe imports renewable energy produced in economies that doesn't meet their standards, can we talk about the energy sustainability here? So this is not just the minor things that we have, there is the huge, I would say, credibility, damaging credibility of the EU as the normative power, and the very credibility the Brussels effect depends on. And now the second problem is the dependence, not only the physical one that may be on the surface quite obvious. So for decades, the European community, it relied on America's umbrella of security. And it can no longer be the same because of the old situations that we can see now. For example, we can look at the Trump's approach to NATO in terms of EU. He has pressured Spain to increase its financial contributions under direct threat of trade restrictions. And certain Spanish political parties, they have actually started thinking about a referendum to leave NATO. And if we talk about the possibility of Spain leaving the EU, it can cause a domino effect in the EU. And the question is whether the EU can remain untiled without the American actor. It quite becomes very real. Also, funneling all European money into the NATO's security programs, it means that Europe cannot build something independent to protect themselves. And when individual states like Germany, they do spend the money on the military, they still buy it from the USA, supporting not their own production of the military services, but on the US market. So beyond the security, we also can talk about the technological dependence. European companies are still running on America cloud services, and the problem is that it's not only about the business risks now, it's more about the ability to be again independent. So here are the questions, like where is the data stored, who has access to data, and the most important thing is that which law is it really need to I'm sorry, does it fall under which law, American or European? And again, these questions, they're quite up to date. So the solution is building the EU software infrastructure through European companies. And if we talk about the institutional side, it's about implementing the Draghi report because 800 billion euros per year in additional investment into key sectors. It means that energy, technology, defense industry, and infrastructure. And the challenge is doing all of this without tipping into protectionism. Which would undermine the EU cooperative role globally. And the answer is to combine regulatory and development approaches, use Europe's regulatory power to reach to set the global standards, and at the same time build the industrial and technological base to be finally independent. Thank you.
So, thank you, Anna. We would like to conclude our presentation by saying some recommendation on how the EU, in our opinion, can mature toward a more autonomous approach in the context of a renewed transatlantic relation, in a transformed transatlantic relation with the United States. As Canadian Prime Minister just said a few months ago in Davos, we should not mourn the old order, and nostalgia is not a strategy. And Europe too must take that lesson by heart. As Anna said before, okay, thank you. As Anna said before, the Draghi report is pretty clear about that. The EU needs to invest an additional 800 billion euros every year to remain competitive, modernize its physical and digital infrastructure, and close the innovation gap with the United States and China. This is not a wish list, it's just a minimum. In our view, implementing these plans mean building a solid European capital markets union, strengthening strategic industries with public funds, and considering economic sovereignty as the real security matter it is. If Europe cannot produce its own semiconductor, its own medicine, and its own clean energy, it will be a continent permanently exposed to external pressure. In this context, trade must play its part. Agreements like the EU-Mercosur deal and the EU-India deal are essential for reducing dependencies because diversifying supply chain while keeping its values is not protectionism, but it means maturing. Also, in the context of energy, the direction is clear. Renewable energy, as we see today, is not just a climate necessity, but a geopolitical imperative. Each solar panel installed, each wind turbine turning, and each hydrogen pipeline built is a step away from risky and costly dependence and a step toward European strategic autonomy. And then comes defense. For too long, as we know, the EU has relied on the US for defense and deterrence, but as we know, it cannot work anymore. The Ukrainians, fighting with extraordinary courage for our values, are showing us how the modern warfare is fought. So through drones, decentralization command, and electronic warfare. We have to learn this lesson, absorb this knowledge, and develop finally a real European common defense architecture, not to be aggressive, of course, but to be credible. It will not be easy, but there are some good signs of hope. Just look what happened a few days ago in Hungary, where Peter Magyar, where a Hungarian citizen chose Europe and hope over fear and isolation. Peter Magyar, as you can see from the photo, won with a landslide victory, ending Viktor Orban's 16 years in power. And he immediately pledged that Hungary's place is in Europe and in NATO, exposing Hungary as a true NATO and EU ally. So this is what democratic resilience looks like and what European maturity sounds like, in our opinion. So to conclude, the transatlantic relationship will endure, but will only be a partnership of equals if Europe decides to take its future into its own hand. Thank you.
Thank you to the presenters and also to the rest of the group. I can witness they did a great job and they were really engaged in this conversation. So now I open the floor to questions. If you feel like just raise your hand. Otherwise, I can ask. I can break the ice by asking a very. I just want your view on these. When you mentioned the Draghi report, okay, so recently Draghi sort of presented himself also as the proponent of a so-called pragmatic federalism. Okay, so he's saying we should not just thinking about consolidating or strengthening our position as an economic power, but we should also think to evolve in political terms, okay? Do you think this option is politically feasible? Is it unrealistic? What is your opinion about this? So it's not just about strengthening, being competitive, it's about being something different than what we've been so far.
Well, in my opinion, these are two dimensions that go together. So without a political union, or at least a more closer relationship between European states, there cannot be a real competition with the United States on one hand and China with the other on the other hand. So I mean, yeah, there are two dimensions going together.
Hello, I'm Gabriela. I'm also in the transatlantic group, and I actually wanted just to thank you all about everything. And I also wanted to say that a lot of us in this group is actually from the countries that aren't still part of the EU. So I just wanted to, for us especially, the united of EU is especially important because we feel that with slight withdrawal from the United States, even the states that are just candidates will have the more of the doors open. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have a question for this group, but a question for all, if I may. So first of all, congratulations for your hard work and fruitful discussion. I am Laura Leonardi, maybe someone of them don't. I am the coordinator of one of the work package of the ValuEUs project. This project of 20 universities in 17 countries and in all the continents of the world. So, and today we have representatives of some of the universities belonging to this network, and I'm particularly proud of this event because, you know, it's a flagship of our work, of our project. So it's very important that it is successful, and I can say it's successful indeed. Congratulations. But I have a question for all the groups. And compliments, of course. You made a very interesting effort to also to give us proposals and perspective on the future. But have you considered also a multi-level perspective in tackling all the issues you have discussing? For example, is there, you all call for institutional change, particularly the architecture of institutions of the EU, of course, of the decision-making processes. But is this a process that can be implemented only by a top-down, direction, or is there a room for a bottom-up process and a role for some institutions. And I'm referring, for example, to local institutions. We are in the City Council of Florence. And the City Council of Florence has a tradition, and here we have the president who could maybe add something more about this role. But in 1965, for example, from here, the mayor of Florence, Giorgio Lapire at that time, went to Vietnam because he wanted to help to implement a dialogue between, in intervening in the Vietnam conflict. He was looking for peace, and he believed that local institutions, a mayor was able to do that. And today we have networks. We have also a role of mayors, also in Europe. And do you think that local institutions could play a role in implementing a process of change also, and pushing, of course, also national governments to change their strategies? And at the same time, what is the role of civil society in all these processes? Do you think there is a role? So I would like to, if you also have discussed about these possibilities or these issues. Thank you. Thank you all. Just to add, also the role of universities, because we all always are asked to give a contribution in this. So what is the role of universities, for example, to
First of all, thank you for the questions because there are many of them combined into one. So I will try to refer to everything, but please correct me if I omit something. Firstly, I would like to reflect on the first part of your question, and that is the multi-level framework of these discussions. That is something that we have discussed a lot in regards to enlargement, but as both Hannes and I have mentioned, enlargement is very particular when it comes to this, especially because we are facing a shift towards illiberalism. And if you say, and of course, the European Union, we can understand it as a peace project, which it was as its essence, but one of the essential pillars of the European Union is economic integration. So with that, if you go with economic integration prior to anything else, there is a fear of reducing rule of law and democratic backsliding coming instead. So I think that in regards to enlargement, it is a very tricky question, and I think that you would need a very, very particular framework in order to actually enforce this. So I would much rather see a shift towards rule of law, because coming from Serbia, that is right now quite low in that regard, I would much, much rather see the European Union focus exactly on that. And that connects perfectly to the other part of your question, and that is about various local actors. I think that it's not just about mayors or universities. Any and every societal actor can be crucial when it comes to any social or political matter in that regard. And I think that, as you mentioned, local communities can be a huge part of that, and there I would also like to emphasize the role of Lillehammer in Norway, which, for instance, was the host of Winter Olympic Games right after the Winter Olympic Games in Sarajevo. And because upon receiving the Olympic torch, they recognized that the siege of Sarajevo is something that should not be happening, and the people of Lillehammer came together and created such I think that's called Lillehammer Fund, and they actually sent it to the citizens of Sarajevo. They did not want to be connected to Bosniaks or Serbs or Croats, but just to help people that are dying there. So there's a huge sense of solidarity across Europe when it comes to this, and I think that local communities are essential when it comes to this conversation. But even more importantly, I would like to emphasize exactly what you mentioned in the end, that is the role of universities, because they don't teach us just about the European Union that we're discussing today here and its role. They teach us also how to be active citizens. They teach us how to be good people, and that is crucial when we are experiencing this shift. And as a young person from Serbia, I cannot but mention the universities that are now struggling for its autonomy. The University of Belgrade has been under siege, but the Serbian regime, and the police has been going again and again in the rectorate of the university, and it is the university specifically that is calling for the respect of democratic and furthermore EU values, and that is calling for transparency and to putting a stop to corruption that is hindering the Serbian society. So I think that without universities and without being a young person that is inclined to learn more and to explore opinions and views that are different from your own, there is no actual societal progress. At the end of the day, we are not just the future of our countries, we are the present, we are the ones who are voting in the electoral process, we are the ones who are making bottom-up approaches, as you were mentioning, and without such grassroots initiatives, the status quo will remain. Thank you.
Okay, so let's say that when 2 years ago we started thinking about this peculiar edition of EU talks, we could not imagine this outcome. The discussion within EU talks in every edition has always been a very top-level discussion, but let me say, and I think you agree, Enrico, this year the quality of the discussion was wow. Really wow, I can't find a different word. So the only thing that now we have to say is thank you. Thank you to all the actors that made this possible, and I will read because I don't want to miss anyone. So first of all, Florence City Council, Europe Direct, and in particular, Diletta. Please stand up, at least once. Yes. And Tommaso, sorry, please stand up. And then the University of Florence, in particular the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence, and in particular Professor Laura Leonardi, because she really pushed us, in particular Enrico and I, to embark in the ValuEUs project. So thank you, Laura, because in the end, this was a gift for us. Then the European University Institute, and in particular the historical archives of the European University Institute, the Center of European Documentation of the European University Institute, and the Association Ponte Europa. The project ValuEUs and the Italian representative of the European Commission, the Center of European Documentation of the University of Florence, the coordinators of the group, so Duccio, Martina, Frederick, but also Claudio, who is not here today. Oh, sorry, Claudio, Jacob, and Andrea. And then last but not least, those at the very heart of this initiative, the students. Thank you, because you really impressed us. And thank you again to the President of the City Council for the very kind hospitality.
That's it, folks. I think we had a fantastic days together. We laughed, also we celebrated, and I think that was important also because we had tough discussions, and then there was also time for socializing, to make friendships that I hope will also overlast these days together. Okay, so Florence will always welcome you. I'm talking now to international students and of course also Italian students. Thank you for participating and for helping us in welcoming this great delegation of university students from all over the world. Thank you to ValuEUs. So for those that are interested in also reading the position papers developed by our students, by our 3 groups, that will be made available in the ValuEUs website. And having said this is the 6th edition. Nicole, shall we think about the 7th now? Of course.
We should pass the torch, because the level this year was so high that we can do something better.
Okay.
Trust me.
Trust me. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, and see you next year. I don't listen to you, Nicola.